Hey everybody, it's Heather from geekyGAMErgirl Plush, and I've had a lot of people emailing me and asking me when I'm going to do a how-to video on my process of plushie making. And I've also had a lot of people ask me to see some Star Wars plushes. So today we're going to see the process of making a Wookiee plush all the way from concept and pattern design to sewing and completion, which is going to be really awesome and fun. So let's get started.
For this particular project, we're going to need faux fur, and we have a brown here. I have about a yard's worth. It's a little bit difficult to work with this material for a beginner. We have two kinds of felt. This one is a stiffer white felt. You can see it doesn't bend as much. It is good for teeth and mouths and details. We also have two other different colors of felt. You can buy felt either by the sheet or on the roll by the yard. Also, we're going to need an assortment of different colors of thread on spools. And of course, stuffing. I like to use polyfill. I find that it stretches and fluffs up a little better. Of course, you're going to need some stick pins to hold your fabric together. And safety eyes. I always use these on plushies. You can see they're going to go through the fabric. We're going to have to cut a hole and put it through. They attach on the back of the fabric with this washer that comes with the eye. You just put it on there and snap it on, and it'll never come off your plushie. And of course, a seam ripper for mistakes that you might make, and a carpenter square. I like using these instead of a ruler. You can see because of the nice square. It's great for patterns. And also we have these tweezers. They're called hemostats. They're medical grade tweezers. They have a lock in the middle, so it's really good to lock onto your fabric and pull it through small openings. Of course, you'll need a good pair of scissors, a razor of some kind or an X-Acto knife, and some kind of writing utensil. It could be a marker or chalk, anything like that. Of course, you're going to need a sewing machine as well, unless you plan on hand sewing everything. I also like to have a curved set of tweezers on hand, just in case, you never know. And I also have hand sewing needles, just regular needles. And you can also see I have some rice here. We're not going to be using it today, but it is used to weigh down some plushies if they need to stand by themselves. So we're going to start out by sketching out what we're going to make today. So we're going to sketch out the Wookiee. I always do a concept sketch before I start patterns or sewing, just so I get an idea of what I am going to end up with. As you see here, I work in a medium of pencil sketch, and then I go over with marker, and I color in with colored pencil. It's just mediums that I prefer to work with. You can use whatever mediums you are comfortable with. I also like to add in a couple of measurements that I would like to end up with on the finished plush. That way it gives me a good idea about what to start on the pattern. Now, making your pattern, it's always a good idea to use a straight edge or ruler. You can see here I have my carpenter square. I like to use it for good crisp 90-degree angles, and then I just put where things like arms, legs, and mouths would go. I also like to put how many of each piece I'll need. And you can see, of course, you'll need a front and a back that's the same shape, so you'll need 2 of that. And for arms and legs, they're the same shape, you'll need 8. So I'll show you a trick that I do to get a good arch. I cut a square, and then I just fold it in half, and I cut the arch in one go. And let's do it again. You cut the square, fold the paper in half, cut your arch, and there we go. It's an even arch for both sides, so you won't have a lopsided creature. I also like to double check all of my measurements to make sure it'll look right. If something looks off, this is the time to change it. Now we'll start with cutting our fabric. You can see here we have our faux fur. It is face down. You turn it over, you make sure the fur is laying the way you want it to lay on your pattern. So we have all of our fur going one way, brushed down. And then we'll take our chalk. Since we have a dark colored fabric, we'll just use chalk. You can see you mark it on there and you rub it. It won't come off all the way until your sewing machine goes over it, and then it'll pretty much disappear. So we have our pattern piece. We outline it with the chalk, and I like to do both at once. On my patterns, I do not leave my seam allowance. So you can see when I cut out my pattern pieces, I add some seam allowance around my pattern. And just repeat this for all of your pattern pieces. Now that I have all my pattern pieces cut, I'm going to start out with making some arms and legs. And I'll just have my two pieces. Of course, you have the right sides facing into each other. That way when you flip the piece inside out, the seams will be on the inside. And you just take a stick pin, and when you put it in, make sure that your fabric pieces are as even as possible. Alright, and there we go, and we're ready for sewing. And you can see as you're working with faux fur, when we get to the close-up, that you can't just go straight through. You have to tuck the fur in as you go. That way your fur won't have big loops in it that's attached into the seam. You're going to repeat that process until all your parts are sewn together. And now for flipping inside out. You're going to start by trimming off all the excess. Make sure you don't cut your seam. And I like to start by popping in the top like that. And then I'll take my hemostats, if it's a longer piece, and push it through a little further. And then you grab and lock your hemostats on the end and pull the rest of the way through. And now we're going to do the fun part. We're going to do the face of our plush. And I like to move the fur with the base of an old paintbrush. It'll get down to the bottom of the fur and it'll stay the way you make it. And you can see I have safety eyes and a safety nose for this particular plush. I'm going to take my stiff felt and I'm going to cut out a mouth for him. And now to put the safety eyes and nose on, I'm going to make sure it's the place I want and then go through with my razor. And you can see that the washers pop on. Sometimes they give you a little bit of a problem, but if you push down extremely hard, they will stay. They're never supposed to come off, so it is a little bit difficult to get on at times. I'm going to add the nose. And for the mouth, I don't like to use the sewing machine. I like to hand sew. I think it gives it a little bit more of a whimsical look. So we're just going to thread our needle and we're going to hand sew the mouth on. Now if you want to add some width to your plushie, then you're going to have to add a strip of fabric between your two identical pieces that make the body. On this one I added a 2-inch width of fabric, and you can see here I'm sewing it on. And you can take it at this point and make sure all your seams are right. Make sure you didn't miss anywhere. And you can flip it inside out. And there's the beginning of your Wookie. We're going to need to flip it back to sew the other side on. Now once you have your other side together, you should have something like this. It's kind of like a bag. And you can see that the Wookie has no arms right now. That is because with faux fur and my sewing machine, I can't run 4 pieces through at the same time. So what we're going to have to do is rip out some seams. I would use the seam ripper, but with faux fur I find it's a little bit easier just to use an X-Acto knife. And just open up the right size hole, and we're going to have to stuff the arm before we sew it onto the body. You just want to fluff up your polyfill or whatever stuffing you chose to use. I don't like my plushes to be hard packed. I like them very squishy. So I fluff out my polyfill and I take my hemostats. If it's a longer piece, I just grasp the polyfill and push it all the way down into the end of the piece. It'll give you a nice even squish for your plush. When you're done stuffing your arm, you just put it on the inside of your body. And if you want your arm to face down on your plush, then you're going to have to put your arm through the hole at an angle. That way, when you flip him inside out, his arm will also be at that angle. And we're just going to hand sew it on. And here's what he'll look like. There's his arm. And we'll just do it to the other side. Now, for the legs, I've already stuffed these. You can see we're going to have to add them at the bottom here. So they're also going to have to go into the body. That way when we flip them out, they'll be on the outside of his body. And just like the arms, we can't machine sew these because the material is simply too thick. So we're going to take our base and just sandwich the leg in between the two pieces and hand sew that together. Just do this for both legs. And I'm going to sew not all the way around because we are going to need a hole in order to flip him inside out from. And here he is with his legs sewn into his body. You can see I did not sew the base completely on because we are going to need the hole in which to flip him inside out. There are his legs. I did the base about 3/4 of the way, leaving a generous hole because we do have stuffed limbs in there and that's going to need some room to get out. So we just flip him inside out and fluff him up a little bit, and he's ready to be stuffed and closed. To close my plushies, I use what is called a blind hem or a slip stitch. After he's stuffed, I just sew him up where it's open and he'll be complete. Now, in order to make his accessories, which is his sash, I will use 2 different kinds of felt and scissors, of course our carpenter square, and a fusible bonding. This is Stitch Witchery, and all it is you get a damp cloth and you put an iron set on steam on it. You put this between the 2 pieces of fabric, iron, and it is fused without a seam. So we'll cut out the black in order to make his sash. I always make everything as even as possible. So we're going to measure everything, cut out the gray squares, and here is our Stitch Witchery. Just put it between the 2 pieces of fabric, iron, and they're fused. And for extra detail and security, I'm just adding a piece of felt down the middle. Now we'll dress up our Wookie and make sure his fur is the way we want it. And there we go.
And that's about it. That is my process on how to make your own plush. Just remember, keep it simple and start with something you're comfortable with. Things like spheres and lots of small pattern pieces are really difficult for beginners. So if you're just starting out, keep it simple. And use your imagination. It can be anything you want it to be. So keep it simple, have fun, and don't forget to check out the Geeky Gamer Girl Plush Facebook page, and you can find the link to that down in the description. Thanks everybody!